Good afternoon, I'm Andy Hodges and welcome to this Mint Special. This is the build-up to the 2020 National Budget. And I tell you, there's excitement sweeping the land of Zimbabwe today, there's no doubt about that. Now, to help us look at what we expect the Minister to put in this build-up to the budget, which should be kick off at around 2 or just after 2, I'm joined by two exceptional panelists. First, I've got Dr. Nyasha Kaseke, UZ Business Studies Department, and Sifulani Jabangwe. He's the past president of the Chamber of Zimbabwe Industries. Gentlemen, welcome to the Mint. I tell you what, though, both of you, very quickly, I mean, I don't know about you, being an economist and so forth, but I'm filled with excitement. I want to know what the minister is expecting to give us. Nyasha, what do you think? Do you think that this is a special day or something we should be looking forward to?
Yeah, from past experience, we always look upon the budget as a way of trying to solve some of the problems, as a way of giving us the green light of the upcoming year. But we have got a lot of connotations in terms of the budget because there are a lot of issues that have to be solved out. For example, how can we increase what production? Other people say that they have got the resources. What is the budget is saying now? So that we produce more goods and what and services.
Right, we're going to get more into that, but you're right, though. Hey, I mean, it is. I don't know. I mean, you're from business, but this is a way of giving us direction, isn't it? That's what a budget is.
Certainly it is. Certainly it is. Because considering what we've gone through as business this year, it's not been an easy year. It's really been a stressful year, and you know, a lot of the things have been to do with the policies that have been put in place regards the austerity. So we look forward to what is it now that the minister is going to offer now that is highlighted that we are post-austerity. What impact will that have on business?
Right, okay, now obviously to look forward, Nyasha, we have to look backwards. And one thing that's pretty clear is that the 2019 budget was seriously affected by, let's call them acts of God. Cyclone Idai, of course, we've had 2 cyclones in fact last year, but Cyclone Idai was the worst, and of course the drought. And that had a huge impact. In fact, the Minister of Finance himself has acknowledged that. So as a result, it's important then that we have a good agricultural season just as an underpinning for the 2020 budget. I think a lot of his assumptions are based on that.
Yeah, definitely that's the idea that we always expect that God is going to give us good rains, which is the assumption that we are making. And we always have to believe that assumption is going to work for us. Otherwise, if it doesn't work, or if you are coming from another drought, it will be a challenge again. For example, if you look in terms of this year, already we've got a deficit of more than 1 million tons that have to be imported from somewhere. And also, if you look in terms of one of the areas which have been affected by Cyclone Idai, they almost need 100% total food supplement in terms of that area. Therefore, if we continue having droughts, then we will be in trouble. And therefore, I think what I've seen now is that the Minister of Agriculture has tried his best. He's been issuing agriculture inputs, which are more of presidential inputs in terms of some of the rural areas, even though one of the components is lacking, which is fertilizer. The seeds have been given, but fertilizer, there's no fertilizer.
So we still have to get that in place.
Yes, we still have to get that in place.
But talking about the rainy season, of course, one area which people forget about, apart from just growing food and wheat and cotton and so forth, is that it will also fill up Kariba, which has an impact on our electricity supply.
Correct. And this has been the biggest problem for industry, because as you know, for any development, the first thing that you need is power. In the absence of power, there's nothing you can do. The industrial revolution was driven, have all been driven on the back of power, and our reliance on Kariba is an issue. But I think we also need to look at alternatives. You know, we're talking to the technocrats. There is power that's also available in the region. And at times, some of the challenges that we've had has been the issue of the time that it has taken us to actually come up with interventions and implementing those interventions. So that, like you said, Dr. Kaseke highlighted, we look forward that God will give us water, but we also need to make up other plans. What if that does not happen? What is going to happen? What are we going to do? Because there's no point thinking about it then, because we know with the climate change, the issue about normal rainfall seasons is no longer something to expect. It is actually to expect the disruption.
Now, I want to tie these two things together because I think they do work hand in hand. If you look at the pre-budget document issued by the Ministry of Finance in September, listen to these numbers. They said that by 2020, end of 2020, they're anticipating inflation to be 2.3%. Keep that number in your heads. Also, they said that they're expecting to emphasize on export diversification and beneficiation of primary commodities because, of course, inflation there's a direct linkage in terms of exports, production, bringing down the cost of goods and services, and apart from the fiscal, we'll get to there later. First of all, Nyasha, 2.3%. If we're looking at where we are now, I mean, in August, the Bankers Association of Zimbabwe said 288% was year-on-year inflation. 2.3% by end of 2020?
To me, hoping that production might have increased and we are able to export, which is now a challenge because, like what my colleague have said, saying that what can we do for us to produce more if there's no electricity? If we are able to deal with some of these issues, then we may achieve that, but it's very difficult to achieve that. One of the reasons is that we are not producing enough. For us to be able to export, we should also have what produced. That's one thing that we should always want to know. Now, if agriculture has been affected like right now, which is the major source of inputs into the production system, this would also cause us not to achieve that.
Well, this is it. I mean, if the minister, Nyasha, bases his numbers and projections on 2.3% inflation by end of 2020, and he's wrong, you are looking at supplementary budgets in 2020 because then it throws out all the numbers, does it not?
Definitely. We have to look up in terms of that budget because we are now sitting on a time bomb. There's one thing that the minister is also ignoring, which to do with wages.
Oh, yes, I'm going to cover that.
That's a time bomb that we are sitting on. Yeah. When that time bomb explodes, it will be a disaster.
No, let's cover that as a separate issue because I think I'd like to look at this. To move on from that, Sifalani, the government, particularly Minister of Finance, has touted a lot about budget surpluses. In fact, they say that 803 million was attained in budget surpluses over the first half, although he did say that there will be deficits by the end of 2019. This is not sustainable, bearing in mind the revenue expected about 24 billion and the expenditure of 28 billion. We're definitely in a deficit, okay? And of course, the million-dollar question is, how does the Minister finance the deficit?
Yeah, correct. And that is of deep concern. If you look at even the inflation, it will be possible to keep the inflation down. Because if you look at what has been the drivers of inflation over the past period, the drivers have been mainly in the creation of money. And the printing of money essentially. And who prints money? It's the government. It's it's the officials. But if they stop that, because every shock that we have actually had, the biggest shocks that we've had have been to do with the creation of money, and this is then driven the inflation. If government stops printing money, then that will end. But if we've got a deficit that we are projecting, how is that going to be financed? Because again, the financing of that deficit can result in exactly what you're talking about.
I'll tell you what, we had a journalist who was briefed by the Minister of Finance about 2 weeks ago, and he was asked directly, how is he going to finance this deficit? And he said, I have it under control, but I can't tell you yet, you have to wait for budget day. But in his pre-budget document, he stated that government would not print money, would not go to the central bank on the overdraft, and possibly they may have to raise some financing through treasury bills. However, I must be honest, that's another discussion for another day, Nyasha, but 14% treasury bills, I'm not quite sure I would pay that in Zimbabwe. But anyway, let's move on, shall we? Now, fiscal targets. One of the things that they want, of course, domestic market financing estimated at 4.7 billion, that was for 2019, of 28.4 billion.
For matters ancillary and incidental to this purpose. As an introduction, Mr. Speaker, allow me to start by thanking the President, His Excellency E.D. Mnangagwa, and the Honorable Vice President, Kembo Mohadi, and Constantino Chiwenga, for their valuable leadership and guidance as we advance the necessary reforms geared towards achieving Vision 2030. The President's vision and political will and leadership has facilitated the implementation of a number of bold policy measures under a challenging economic environment. This was clear from the State of the Nation address by His Excellency on 1 October 2019. Concurrently, I wish to appreciate the cooperation and contributions received from my colleagues, honorable ministers in Cabinet, and look forward to their continued engagement as we implement this 2020 budget. Mr. Speaker, allow me to also express my indebtedness for the support I've received from this august House through its oversight functions. In particular, I've benefited immensely from the contributions of the Budget, Finance and Investment Portfolio Committee, Public Accounts Committee, as well as other important portfolio committees. The recent engagement with all the portfolio committees of this august House during the 2020 Parliamentary Pre-Budget Seminar held in Victoria Falls over the period 31st October to the 3rd of November 2019 facilitated very useful in-depth discussions and recommendations. Recommendations from that seminar, together with various other contributions by the citizenry, individuals, civic society, professional and business organizations, have been invaluable in forming the basis for the 2020 budget, which is being supported by the following separate documents. One, the 2020 National Budget Statement, which details, with details on the economy, the budget priorities, and summarized allocations. The 2020 Infrastructure Investment Plan, the 2020 National Budget Highlights, which is a simplified and summarized version of the budget. This is also referred to as the People's Budget. And then number 4, the estimates of expenditure, the Blue Book, with detailed expenditure allocations, the Finance Bill, and finally, the Appropriation Bill. Mr. Speaker, sir, the theme of the 2020 National Budget is therefore gearing for higher productivity, growth, and job creation. I repeat, gearing for higher productivity, growth, and job creation. Allow me now to contextualize the 2020 budget by briefly highlighting economic development during 2019 and expectations for the outlook period, 2020. Let me start with the state of the economy, Mr. Speaker, sir. The year 2019 started with good prospects following the introduction of key macro fiscal reforms aimed at stabilizing and resuscitating the economy in line with the Transitional Stabilization Program objectives. Allow me to share a quote from Orson Whitney, a famous religious leader, where he says that no pain that we suffer, no trial that we experience is wasted. It ministers to our education and development. The reforms which were centered on austerity for prosperity were in no way a retribution, especially in view of the fact that our public finances were not balancing following years of unsustained fiscal deficits. To correct that, the new dispensation had to put aside the notion of shortcuts, magic solutions, loose funding by strengthening fiscal discipline and tightening monetary policy in order to start rebuilding the economy. This primarily entails switching priorities from unproductive fiscal operations to sound and responsible fiscal spending, which placed the fiscus on the right path. And indeed, during the course of the year, specific milestones were made, particularly in sanitizing public finances, implementing structural reforms, infrastructure rehabilitation, social service delivery, among other achievements. With regards to the fiscus, implementation of fiscal consolidation reforms saw consistent monthly budget surpluses or savings reaching 1.4 billion Zimbabwe dollars between January and August 2019. Similarly, the current account managed to deliver a positive balance of 116.4 million United States dollars during the first half of the year, which all pointed to positive signs for restoring the much-needed macro-fiscal stability and elimination of the twin deficit. I have on the screens an illustration of the budget deficit on the left and then the current account deficit on the right, two charts, and we can see the difference between 2017, 2018 for each of them, and then 2019. That shows that the two twin deficits have indeed narrowed substantially. In contemplating fiscal consolidation, tight monetary policy was restored following the reintroduction of the local currency and ensuring re-establishment of a liberalized foreign exchange market, which is, however, in its infancy and requires strengthening. And here I refer to slide 2. There is a sample of the new $5 cash. I have the new $2 cash because I don't see a picture of the $2, so I'll show you my copy. And when this kind of paper is strong, if you squash it, chidomboga check. to spring back into life. We made sure that the money is tough and resilient and also exudes strength. On the structural side, milestones were recorded in advancing the ease of doing business reforms, culminating in Zimbabwe's ranking improving by 16 points from 156 to 140 on the ease of doing business rankings. I do hear that this ranking achievement was celebrated in other capitals around the world. People couldn't believe that Zimbabwe had achieved this level of ranking in the environment for doing business. Furthermore, notwithstanding the difficult macroeconomic environment characterized by escalating costs associated with exchange rate shocks, progress was also made in the area of infrastructure development. Through ring-fencing resources, various infrastructure projects in the sectors of health, education, water and roads, as well as rural electrification were either completed or at an advanced execution stages to allow delivery in the short term. In addition, complementary loan financing enabled implementation of a number of key infrastructure projects, such as Wanke 7 and 8, expansion project, the new Parliament building, and the RG International Airport. The implementation of this project is on course. To mitigate the hardships arising from external shocks of the drought and South Cyclone Idai, domestic resources were mobilized for various humanitarian needs and social protection requirements, which were also supported by development partners. I would like to sincerely thank our development partners for their continued humanitarian support. Let me highlight some challenges, Mr. Speaker, sir. Unfortunately, the 2019 budget faced a very difficult economic environment, which was aggravated by a severe 2018-2019 drought, which caused food insecurity and depressed electricity generation with negative spillovers into the rest of the sectors of the economy. This is visible from the slide up there, these challenges, in terms of how they work by impacting directly on agriculture, indirectly through electricity output, and also impacting other sectors as well, because every sector is linked to other sectors. A humanitarian crisis also descended on the country due to the Cyclone Idai, which caused significant loss of lives and left about 270,000 people in urgent need of humanitarian assistance, besides causing widespread property and infrastructure destruction. Furthermore, a complex macroeconomic environment marked with acute foreign currency shortages amid limited international financial support, marked distortions, and rising inflation further imposed immense pressure on the economy. These challenges reversed some of the stabilization gains we had made and put us off track on some of our TSP and the staff monitored program targets. Consequently, the economy was left in a weak position during the better part of the year, with growth now projected at minus 6.5% in 2019. The slide, I think it was I don't think you can read that, but it will show that end of year projection in terms of growth is minus 6.5%, and those are some of the sectoral growth figures. So you can see where the pressure is coming from. It's mainly through agriculture, and then industry and mining, naturally being impacted by the power outages. Inflationary pressures also arose from the depreciation of the depreciating exchange rate of the local currency against the US dollar. This was further fueled by adverse market expectations during the second half of the year. Yeah, and you can see the correlation there between inflation and the exchange rate. To you, Mr. Speaker, they really move together. So we can see where the pressure is coming from in terms of pricing. It is coming from mainly the parallel market. However, economic recovery of up to 3% is projected in 2020, primarily premised on the following key assumptions. We expect, one, a better rainfall season supported by increased support towards rehabilitation and development of irrigation infrastructure to sustain agriculture activities. Also, we expect better planning for increased agriculture production. That's also critical. Number two, we expect improved macroeconomic stability through continued fiscal and monetary discipline as well as a substantial improvement in the balance of payments position. This will also improve due to improved electricity supply through imports and other alternative sources of energy. These include harnessing of emergency power generation capacity from independent power producers and projects. The extension of supportive tax and non-tax incentives to stimulate domestic production, yet another factor. Advancing implementation of the ongoing ease of doing business reforms will also improve the investment climate and be a positive factor as well. And finally, increased investment by both government and the private sector is yet another factor that will impact positively on the prospects of the economy. Similarly, monthly inflation is expected to fall to single digit from the first quarter of 2020 to close the year at 2% on the back of commitment by RBZ, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, to implement tight reserve money supply targeting framework as announced in the second 2019 monetary policy statement. Let me turn to the 2020 budget objectives and thrust, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker said the 2020 national budget marks the exit from austerity to growth stimulation and employment generation era through promotion of production-oriented investment and productivity without losing focus on fiscal responsibility. Slide 7 up there shows the progression that we are on to, that having gone through austerity for prosperity, it is time to exit and progress towards promoting the microeconomy, productivity growth, and above all, job creation. So, the 5 pillars for the budget, Mr. Speaker, say 2020 national budget is productivity and growth, job creation, promoting competitiveness, promotion of more sustainable and inclusive development, and finally, export diversification and import substitution. The growth and productivity thrust will be supported by the re-engagement process with the international community, which will enable us to meet our budget objectives. Let me turn to the 2020 budget macro-fiscal framework. Informed by the above economic developments and outlook, revenue projections for 2020, Mr. Speaker, are estimated at 58.6 billion Zimbabwe dollars. In order to avoid the undesirable impact of deficits on money supply and macroeconomic instability, the 2020 macro-fiscal framework espouses a low budget deficit of around 1.5% of GDP, implying expenditure of 63.6 billion Zimbabwe dollars, excluding retentions. So 1.5% budget deficit. So really we're targeting a near balanced budget in 2020. Let me say a few things on retention of funds. In 2020, retention funds are projected at 2.1 billion. Members will recall that with effect from 2018, retentions were subjected to parliamentary appropriation process to enable transparency and accountability. The thrust was to ensure that while the income generated earmarked to address specific objectives specified in each fund's constitution, the expenditure estimates were subjected to scrutiny by both Treasury and Parliament with respect to prioritization. To enhance retention funds' accountability and transparency and to comply with best practice, the retention funds will be expected to wind up in 2020 and be part of consolidated revenue, of the Consolidated Revenue Fund to Treasury beginning fiscal year 2021. Ministers and departments are therefore being directed to proceed to ensure that procedures to wind up retention funds are implemented by 31 December 2020. I also propose to wind up retention funds with effect from 31 December 2020, with their income streams being redirected to the Consolidated Revenue Fund with effect from January 2021. Let me turn to statutory funds. Statutory funds are projected at 2.6 billion during the 2020 budget year. These funds are constituted pursuant to the provisions of specific acts of Parliament, which stipulate their respective mandates in line with this objective to exercise a general direction and control over public resources. Let me turn to fiscal policy. The main fiscal policy objective in 2020 is therefore directed at managing expenditure within the allocated budget supported by non-inflationary financing and complemented by a tight monetary policy framework. This is shown on slide 9, if you can read small letters. Strict adherence to the procedures laid out in the Public Finance Management Act, including the issuance of warrants by the Accountant General prior to any spending commitment made by an accounting officer, will be strictly enforced. The rule of law will be the order of the day under my watch. For the success of the 2020 budget, the following specific risks will receive amplified mitigation attention. One, spending outside budget. In 2019, spending outside the budget and macroeconomic shocks disrupted the attainment of some of the TSP targets. Refraining from unbudgeted operations and borrowing from the central bank will therefore constitute a key obligation for both Treasury and the central bank authorities. Let me turn to wage pressures. The prevailing inflationary environment has eroded incomes for most of our workers. Wage compression, thank you very much. Wage compression has affected aggregate demand with its negative effect on the GDP. Government is committed to ensuring a decent standard of living for its public servants and will take into account inflationary developments in the ongoing COLA wage negotiations. Let me turn to the 2019 bonuses for civil servants. Treasury has made arrangements to pay all civil servants their bonuses in the month of November. All civil servants. The bonuses are based on a formula that is inclusive of transport and housing allowances, which is a one-off variation to current policy which base these payments to basic salary only. This was designed to bring relief to public servants in light of the erosion of disposable incomes under the current high inflationary environment. Let me turn to the Public Services Pension Fund. Mr. Speaker said the 2019 budget availed 70.4 million as seed money for the establishment of the Public Service Pension Fund to facilitate movement from the pay-as-you-go to a defined contribution plan. A further 289.5 million is proposed in the 2020 budget towards the initiative. Once set up, government will identify assets that will be tied to the scheme as a way of further enhancing its balance sheet. Let me turn to subsidies and other market distortions. Market distortions associated with subsidies present an additional risk to macroeconomic and fiscal stability. In particular, subsidies on fuel, electricity, and agriculture have in the past led to large and often unpredictable expenses. Where subsidies are deemed essential and can be financed, there will be need to be clearly targeted, reflected in the budget with adequate budgetary provisions. To ensure effective implementation of the proposed subsidy policy, additional measures will be taken to tighten eligibility to subsidize goods and services so that only those who are eligible can benefit. Let me turn to fuel and electricity pricing. Government has already instituted new pricing frameworks for fuel and electricity that adequately reflect costs, including those resulting from changes in import prices and exchange rate fluctuations. The pricing framework for fuel also ensures that the pump prices remain comparable with those charged in neighboring countries, so as to remove arbitrage opportunities arising from illicit fuel exports. Let me turn to the new grain subsidy model. The current subsidy policy whereby government funds the procurement of grain at a market price and sell this to registered grain millers at subsidized prices has been open to abuse and placed a huge burden on the fiscus. At times, the intended beneficiaries do not enjoy the benefits of the subsidy from government. thus cost-reflective tariff structure, also serve the purpose of reshaping demand patterns in the effective and efficient use of scarce resources in the economy. To address these distortions, Mr. Speaker, government will, with effect from January 2020, remove the existing grain marketing subsidies for maize and wheat that were being provided to grain millers through the Grain Marketing Board, GMB. The intervention will see GMB selling wheat and maize at market prices, with grain millers having an option to either import or purchase grain from GMB. This means the prices of basic commodities such as bread and meal may adjust. In order to protect vulnerable groups of our society, government will extend targeted subsidies on the production of roller meal, of cooking oil, and the standard loaf of bread. A reimbursement system will be implemented in order to extend the subsidy to the producers of roller meal, cooking oil, and standard bread through tax set-off arrangements, where possible, and voucher schemes for the vulnerable. Let me turn to public transport system, Mr. Speaker. To cushion the commuting public against the rising cost of transport, government will continue to subsidize bus transport system as well as capacity at ZUPCO to provide an efficient public transport system. In this regard, ZUPCO will be facilitated to purchase more reliable conventional buses. Let me turn to the issue of the single exchange rate, Mr. Speaker. In order to further remove unbudgeted subsidies as well as to avoid their resurgence, government will apply a single exchange rate regime throughout all sectors of the economy to avoid implicit subsidies arising from preferential allocation of foreign exchange at below market exchange rates, as it was previously the case for fuel imports and other prioritized goods. Let me turn to the financing modalities for agriculture. In line with our Smart Agricultural Trust, which seeks to promote productivity and sustainable financing, government reiterates the policy position of financing commercial agriculture, including command agriculture, from being government-led to bank-led, with government providing guarantees to banks and from time to time providing liquidity as well. In the same vein, resolution of the bankability of the 99-year leases will gradually remove the necessity of government guarantees and boost productivity in agriculture. Going forward, direct financing support by government will be targeted at vulnerable households under the social protection programs. Let me turn to some supply-side interventions. Over the long period of time, the economy has endured underinvestment virtually in almost all sectors, Mr. Speaker. The bigger portion of the national budget resources were primarily directed to current budget expenditures. That way, undermining all infrastructure and other developmental programs, which ironically supports both stabilization and growth objectives. The 2020 budget therefore prioritizes enhancing productivity for growth that creates better jobs and ensuring equity and inclusivity. Let me now turn to some strategies for enhancing productivity for growth, Mr. Speaker. The stabilization reforms, which started in the last quarter of 2018, lay a firm foundation for enhancing productivity for sustainable, inclusive economic growth. The thrust for 2020 is centered on ramping up productivity in agriculture, manufacturing, mining, services sectors, to create jobs and reduce imports. For agriculture, embracing climate-smart agriculture will improve prospects for agricultural sector, which is projected to grow by at least 5% in 2020. This growth is attributable also to a better rainfall season during the 2019-2020 season, supported by timely disbursements of inputs. In line with this thrust, emphasis will be on better planning, shared financing burden between government and the private players, productivity, which also relies on irrigation and marketing systems which guarantee farmer viability. On better planning, the 2020 budget makes a turning shift from ad hoc planning to more forward planning, particularly in terms of availability of inputs on the market. The budget will therefore, starting in January 2020, establish an appropriate financing plan which ensures early build-up and ring-fencing both local currency and resources and foreign currency resources in support of domestic input producers and importation of inputs. This resolves the challenge of agriculture demands competing with other programs for both domestic and foreign resources during the last quarter of the year, which apparently coincides with the start of the summer cropping season. Accordingly, for the capacitation of the Ministry of Lands, Agriculture, Water, Climate and Rural Resettlement, I'm allocating 1.9 billion Zimbabwe dollars for its prioritized programs, which is in irrigation, veterinary services, farmer compensation, agriculture, education, extension services, crop and livestock research and technology, land survey and mapping, and the total, without reading the figures out, is 1.9 billion. Let me turn to dealing with climatic shocks. Over the years, Zimbabwe has been experiencing severe droughts at a rate of 1 in 10 years and mild droughts of 1 in 3 years. Given that the economy is highly dependent on rain-fed agriculture, there is an urgent need to drought-proofing the sector. There's a chart out there showing the various episodes of drought which coincide with negative output in the form of negative GDP growth. And this year is no different. That's why we've got this drought period coinciding with the GDP growth of minus 6.5%. There are greater chances that the 2019 season will be maybe not so good, but it's still promising. Such developments will, if they materialize, may escalate government expenditures on grain importation, infrastructure rehabilitation, and disease control. Government is therefore creating a fiscal buffer to the tune of 165 million Zimbabwe dollars to cater for drought shocks, as well as targeting early warning systems. Other drought-proofing measures, such as investment in irrigation infrastructure, dam construction, and desalination, as well as research and extension services, adoption of drought-resistant varieties, which is traditional grains, will be put in place during the 2020 agriculture season. On extension services, the 2020 budget allocates 281.5 billion Zimbabwe dollars towards agricultural extension and advisory services to facilitate dissemination of agricultural information, new technologies, and improved agricultural practices. On irrigation and food security, under the 2020 budget, irrigation development is receiving top priority in order to guarantee food security in the country. Government will therefore target irrigable hectarage to guarantee grain production of around 1.8 million tons. For this purpose, capable farmers with irrigation facilities will be identified with a view of contracting and supporting them to produce required grain specifically for food security. Similarly, the 200 hectare per district irrigation program will be supported, taking advantage of the smart agriculture orientation, which will also promote solar irrigation systems. For the total irrigation program, the budget provides 422 million Zimbabwe dollars. Let me now turn to the compensation of former commercial farmers. The government is concluding the evaluation exercise to facilitate the compensation of former commercial farmers. To date, approximately 768 former farm owners consented to the interim payment scheme, with over 500 farmers having been paid already. In 2019, a total of 68 million was availed towards former farm owners, and the 2020 budget is also targeted to set aside 380 million for interim compensation in line with the Constitution and the BIPAs, and we're also targeting the vulnerable and the elderly farmers. In addition, consultations with the international financial institutions and other stakeholders on sustainable options for for mobilizing the requisite compensation resources are being expeditiously explored. Almost there. Oh, okay. Yeah. It's slippery. Oops. Let me turn to the mining sector, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, realization of the $12 billion mining industry target by year 2023 will be advanced through the 2020 budget. The sector is projected to rebound to 4.7% growth on account of the expected improvements in the availability of power of electricity. With regards to gold mining, government is aware of the challenges related to ring-fencing arrangements, tensions, gold deliveries to Fidelity printers, among others, and these are receiving serious attention. Going forward, investment agreements in platinum, gold, chrome, among others, which have been concluded, are expected to boost output in the sector. Furthermore, in 2020, the fiscal regime for the mining sector will be fine-tuned and improved, while the Ministry of Mines and Mineral Development will be resourced to enhance exploration, which is critical for expansion in the sector. Mr. Speaker says Zimbabwe is underexplored as a mineral-rich country, and we intend to deal with this. This will allow the ministry to acquire the relevant equipment such as computers, among others, and vehicles. The Minerals Marketing Corporation of Zimbabwe will be supported through a credit guarantee scheme to provide funding and support the non-gold sector. Accordingly, I'm allocating $293.2 million to the Ministry of Mines and the Mining Development for its capacitation in terms of planning, promotion of exploration, data capturing, automation, among others. Let me turn to curbing of mineral leakages. Mineral exports remain the major sources of foreign currency, especially gold. However, leakages have been on the rise, depriving the country of foreign currency earnings. Government is therefore reviewing and tightening the Gold Trade Act and capacitating the Gold Mobilization Unit. Let me turn to industry and manufacturing. Implementation of the Zimbabwe National Industrial Development Policy and the local content strategy will increase capacity utilization, strengthen industrial value chains, job creation, and export-led industrialization. A few charts on the screens to animate the presentation a little bit. The 2020 budget is therefore advancing industrialization thrust through actualizing value chains and implementing the local content strategy, initially targeting support to the following subsectors: pharmaceuticals, tire production, hides and leather processing, and steel production. Treasury will capitalize the IDC, the Industrial Development Corporation, by $240 million to enable it to undertake its mandate effectively. IDC will focus on a promotion of research and development to increase productivity, diversification, and broadening product range and creating opportunities for job creation. Treasury will also provide a guarantee scheme for companies to access capital from financial institutions for retooling purposes. Overall, the Ministry of Industry and Commerce is allocated a budget of $368 billion, excluding the other resources directed to IDC and excluding the credit guarantee scheme for companies to access credit from financial institutions for retooling. Let me turn to something new, really new, which is the development of rural growth poles. Rural growth poles. The devolution program should embrace the rural growth poles development, a model anchored on cascading special economic zones to the respective growth poles. Growth poles will be considered on the basis of the comparative advantage of the area. Local authorities have therefore a greater role to play in promoting this model through developing the necessary infrastructure and investment mobilization initiatives. Emphasis would be on ensuring that targeted growth poles have the necessary basic infrastructure of potable water and sanitation. The central government, on its part, will provide requisite fiscal incentives. Let me turn to tourism, yet another sector that will drive productivity and growth. Tourism is recognized as one of the pillars anchoring the country's economic growth. The sector has continued on a positive trajectory path, Mr. Speaker, as evidenced by tourist arrivals that grew from 1.8 million in 2013 to 2.5 million in 2018. It is expected that tourist arrivals will marginally increase to 2.7 million in 2019, irrespective of the fact that there's a tough macroeconomic environment. In order for the sector to achieve its set priorities, the 2020 budget is allocating 291 million to the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change, Tourism, and Hospitality industry. Let me speak now to renewal of fiscal incentives. The government provided some duty dispensations for the tourist sector equipment, such as luxury buses, which have assisted the sector by providing an investment window to aid the recovery of the sector. The respective facilitative statutory instruments have a 1 to 2 year lifespan, and hence most will expire at the end of this year. This issue is receiving due consideration under the revenue measures, which I will present later. Let me turn to the construction sector and housing. The National Housing Delivery Program seeks to address the country's housing backlog, estimated to be around 1.3 million, within the context of urban renewal or regeneration. This involves the modernization of old and dilapidated superstructures and the attendant infrastructural services such as sewer and water. This program has also immense opportunities for creating jobs and value addition, and I'm therefore providing 2.68 million towards it. Government has approved the concept of the new city being constructed on 18,000 hectares of land in Mount Hamden, with new Parliament building as the catalyst. A modern conference center will also be budgeted under the 2020 national budget. I repeat, a modern conference center will also be budgeted for and built under the 2020 national budget. While government will support in terms of infrastructure, the private sector is being invited to invest in new technologies such as fiber networks, solar, biogas, as well as building infrastructure through PPPs, public-private partnerships. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me turn to the youth, job creation, and entrepreneurship. The youth are making an important contribution to economies as productive workers. Entrepreneurs, consumers, they're citizens, they're members of society, and they're agents of change. Taking advantage of this demographic dividend can also speed up the pace for inclusive economic development. In most cases, the full potential of young people is not realized owing to lack of access to productive and decent jobs. Mr. Speaker, I propose something called the Youth Employment Tax Incentive, YETI. Under the 2020 budget, a fiscal incentive is being introduced to support employers who generate jobs for our young job seekers. Any additional job created will attract a percentage tax rebate to the employer linked to the employee's salary. This measure will reduce the employer's cost of hiring young people through a cost-sharing mechanism with government. To operationalize the YETI program, the Minister of Finance and Economic Development will work closely with Zimbabwe, Minister of Justice, Minister of Labour and Social Services, MCOs, and other relevant organizations to work out the respective legal and administrative framework. And I'll give more detail further down the presentation. Let me turn to the National Venture Capital Fund. In order to increase economic opportunities and participation by Zimbabwe youth in national development, the National Venture Capital Fund will be capitalized in both local and foreign currency to incorporate the financing of startups projects of our youth, with preference being given to targeted areas in the context of the local content strategy. Treasury, through the 2020 budget, is committing $500 million for this fund. The fund will provide affordable loans to young entrepreneurs, including those engaged in production, that way encouraging them to be job creators and not job seekers. This marks the launch of the Presidential Youth Entrepreneurship Program to drive entrepreneurship among the youth, and will be championed by no less than His Excellency the President. Employment-intensive investments, if I can turn to that. Investment in infrastructure development plays an important part in job creation. Job opportunities will be created through investments in roads, water, energy, construction, ICT, and social services infrastructure. It is with this view in mind, I've allocated $2.6 billion for infrastructure development under this budget. Specific flagship labor-intensive programs being supported by this budget includes roads rehabilitation program, that's $1.2 billion, dam construction, budgeted at $1.4 billion. The above budgetary provision is being complemented by loan financing, development partners, and private sector investment initiatives. Let me turn to, again, women, youth, empowerment, SMEs, and medium-scale enterprises. Government will continue to play its role in capacitating various institutions which support women, youth, medium, and small-scale enterprises, besides facilitating access to markets, workspace, trade promotion, and capacity building, among other critical support. A few more charts, again, to keep animating the conversation. In 2020, the budget provides for capitalization of the following institutions, which support various SMMEs projects: Women Development Fund, $20 million, Community Development Fund, $15 million, Zimbabwe Women Microfinance Bank, $100 million, SMEDCO, $90 million, and Empower Bank, $50 million. The specific allocation in support of projects and programs aimed at empowering women, including the completion of refurbishment of training centers such as Jamaica Inn, Roger Howman, and the construction of safe houses in all provinces will be undertaken in 2020. Let me turn to the issue of protecting intellectual property rights. Innovation, which is integral for growth and better job creation, is lacking protection and hence suppressed in its infancy. A number of micro and small to medium-scale enterprises, artists, and other entrepreneurship initiatives collapse owing to unfair practices where other organizations take advantage of inventors' work and make duplications. This is despite the inventors having invested a considerable amount of money and time in developing innovative products. Therefore, government, through this budget, is strengthening intellectual property rights through capacitating the respective institutions mandated to protect patent innovative products, including trademarks and copyrights. This gives exclusive rights, exclusive rights in commercializing the invention and enabling SMEs to obtain higher returns for their investments. Let me turn to the issue of equitable and inclusive development, which is a pillar, again, of this 2020 national budget. Here I'm reminded by a very simple statement from one of my former teachers, Professor Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize winner in economics a few years back, he said the only true and sustainable prosperity is shared prosperity. The 2020 national budget is therefore centered and therefore first and foremost prioritizes promoting equitable development through appropriate investments, particularly in infrastructure development and social service delivery. The devolution model of development is also embraced through appropriate allocations in line with the Constitution. Turning to infrastructure, infrastructure investment play a key role in enhancing competitiveness, including growth. Underfunded and neglected infrastructure services results in the economy performing in a highly inefficient manner, and the widespread disruptions to electricity and other services only adds to cost to business operations and increases the burden to the public. We have a 2020 infrastructure priority plan, Mr. Speaker. In this regard, the 2020 infrastructure investment plan provides a roadmap towards infrastructure development and recovery, and ensuring public assets are restored to full working condition, including addressing the apparent high cost of service provision, which currently present binding constraints to sustained inclusive economic growth. The 2020 priority list is a culmination of engagements and consultation among stakeholders, and consultation with stakeholders, including the ministry departments and agencies, the parliamentary portfolio committees. The priority list projects are included in the 2020 infrastructure investment plan, which we will share after the presentation. Funding of the infrastructure projects will include resources from the budget, private sector sources under PPPs, as well as long-term concessional loans. There's a budget breakdown there which shows what we're allocating for the budget, loans, development partners, public entities' own resources, and some statutory funds. Consistent with the prioritization framework of the 2020 infrastructure investment plan, the following allocations are proposed. For transport, 4.5 billion, for energy, 8.9 billion, and then for water and sanitation, 2.5 billion, agriculture infrastructure, 0.9 billion, ICT, 1.2 billion, housing, 2.68 billion, health, 2 billion, the education sector, 1.9 billion. So this pertains to the budget allocations for infrastructure in these sectors. Let me turn to electricity supply. The 2020 budget seeks to alleviate power supply constraints through the following strategies. One, rehabilitation and expansion of Wange Thermal Power Station. That's $8.4 billion. Then supporting alternative sources of energy, such as solar power projects, through various fiscal incentives relating to importation of equipment and respective accessories. There's 20 IPP solar projects already lined up for implementation. While ZESA will raise the local resource component through cost recovery tariff model, government through the RBZ will assist to mobilize the requisite foreign currency from the market. On rural electrification, Mr. Speaker said, the Rural Energy Master Plan aims at broadening modern energy access through the development of grid-connected solar and mini hydro power plants, installation of solar photovoltaic microgrids, solar home systems, solar water pumping systems, and biogas digester plants. Furthermore, the Rural Electrification Fund will invest in extending the grid to sites identified in the Rural Energy Master Plan in order to increase the rural electrification rate, which currently stands at 13%. This will also include rural growth poles. This budget provides $142 million for this important development program, seeking to improve the livelihoods of our rural population. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the issue of devolution and the transfers to local authorities. The path taken of devolving powers and resources from central government to provincial councils and local authorities recognizes the right of communities to manage their own affairs, drive development at the sub-national level, and ensures other tiers of government do not rely on the goodwill of central government for resources. With the additional resources at their disposal, provincial councils and local authorities will now need to be more responsive to the needs of their constituencies, as well as provide services to all people in a sustainable and inclusive manner. With regards to the 2020 financial year, an appropriate allocation equivalent to 5% of the budget, which is 2.93 billion, statutory requirement for provincial council and local authorities will be distributed, 2.93 billion, to the lower tiers of government in line with the agreed formula, targeting projects that have already been identified by local authorities. So that allocation has gone up from the order of 700 million in the 2019 budget to almost 3 billion in the 2020 budget, targeting devolution, that small aspect of 5% of the national budget in terms of allocation. I now turn to the sector of information communication technology, or the digital economy. The rapid development and adoption of ICTs has been transforming every sector of the Zimbabwe economy. The second quarter of 2019 show a high active mobile penetration rate of 84.8%, a high internet penetration rate of 57.2%, and a static fixed teledensity of 1.9%. To systematically exploit the potential of ICTs for national development and transformation, the government of Zimbabwe is developing the Smart Zimbabwe 2030 Master Plan, which is an all-inclusive guideline that clearly articulates how the country will develop, deploy, and manage ICTs across all sectors. The Smart Zimbabwe 2030 Master Plan and implementation strategy will be part of the National Infrastructure Master Plan. Let me turn to the National E-Government programs. Government is rolling out the National E-Government program in order to simplify communication between citizens and government, and the creation of an effective system for government departments to interact with each other. This also enables citizens to gain quicker access to government services and hence greater user satisfaction and substantial monetary savings. In this budget, in this regard, the 2020 budget has made a provision of 341.7 million for the above ICT programs under the relevant ministry. Let me turn to the area of water supply and sanitation, which has already been mentioned earlier in the speech. The strategic focus of the wash sector during the 2020 budget is to restore basic water and sanitation services through maintenance, rehabilitation, and upgrade of infrastructure, harnessing of water through construction of dams, weirs, bore rehabilitation and drilling, and water and sanitation in our urban areas. Accordingly, the following projects have been prioritized in the 2020 budget. The Gwai Shangani Dam, $400 million has been allocated. Causeway Dam, $128 million has been allocated. Chivu Dam, $192 million has been allocated. Kunzui Dam, $259 million has been allocated. Semwa Dam, $216 million, and other dams, $205 million, and water supply schemes, $113 million, and local authorities, water and sanitation, that part has been allocated $311 million. Mr. Speaker, sir, I now turn to road infrastructure. The road development program, which commenced in 2018, will be sustained through 2020, with the resources being set aside for the program, targeting the following. I think there's a slide, there are pictures of a few roads up there. We target the following. One, the dualization and upgrading of the Harare Beitbridge Road. We're allocating $1 billion to this. And we have a strategy of how to raise the $1 billion. I'll talk about it in a few minutes. Ongoing upgrading works on trunk roads, $1.2 billion. Number 3, rehabilitation and maintenance of rural feeder roads through DDF, that's $120 million. And then the local authority roads funded through Zinara, we're budgeting $510.8 million. The above excludes resources being channeled to local authorities through the intergovernmental fiscal transfers for roads infrastructure development. I now turn to mass urban transport system, Mr. Speaker, sir. A comprehensive public transport policy framework is required, along with a transparent partnership between central and local government and the private sector. That's a few buses up on the screen. Government has since introduced the urban mass transport system, initially targeted at urban areas, which has also been extended to other parts of the country. The government will deepen and fine-tune the system in order to bring sanity to the sector, and meanwhile allocates $540 million as a subsidy to this public policy program. On social services are integral to equitable development. Government will pay more attention to efficient and timely utilization of resources allocated for social sector services, including reducing any bottlenecks being encountered. Let me turn to the health sector. Government has made positive gains on some of its healthcare indicators over the recent past. For example, Mr. Speaker said, under 5 mortality has fallen from 98 per 1,000 live births in 2008 down to 56 in 2016. Other areas relate to improvements in immunization with both DPT, diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, DPT, and measles reaching 90% and 95% respectively. This is improvements in immunization. If you look at HIV incidence, this has fallen from 1 to 0.48, while prevention of mother-to-child transmission of HIV, PMTCT, that rate has fallen from 30 to 5.7, among other achievements. Such achievements have empowered the government to lobby for additional support from various bilateral and multilateral sources, such as the Global Fund for HIV, TB, and malaria. To consolidate our achievements in the health care sector, I am allocating $6.5 billion to that ministry, for the sector, to improve our lives and extend our lives. This will cater for health infrastructure, personnel welfare, medicines, drugs, and sundries, among other essential hospital equipment and necessities. It says right here. I don't know what picture that is, but the picture of some nice-looking hospital. Let me turn to the education sector, Mr. Speaker, sir. Ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and the promotion of lifelong learning opportunities for all students remains the country's top priority in the education sector, as government commits to leave no child behind. Similarly, the energy for change, innovation, creativity, and ultimate inclusive economic growth needs investments in the human capital base. A government will therefore continue to focus on creating a highly developed human capital in primary, secondary, and tertiary education, and has accordingly allocated $8.5 billion for the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education. And $2.2 billion for the Higher and Tertiary Education Ministry. I think it's now higher education, higher and tertiary education, I think innovation and science and technology development for their various programs, $2.2 billion. Within the Ministry of higher and tertiary education, innovation, science and technology. There's the concept of innovation hubs. Under the 2020 budget, the major focus will be on completing the setting and equipping up to let me start afresh. Under the 2020 budget, the major focus will be on completing and setting up of the first 6 innovation hubs and operationalizing them to ensure existing innovations in the different universities are developed into prototypes that will be industrialized at the industrial parks. Resources will be allocated to stimulate and support innovation and industrialization. A graduate retention program designed to equip graduates with entrepreneurial skills and business experience will enable them to become productive and play a key role in national development will be initiated. Let me turn to apprenticeship. The apprenticeship program initiated last year with 1,000 new apprentices being recruited. We'll see another cohort of 1,000 apprentices being recruited by the beginning of next year. Let me turn to the support for school children's sanitary wear. This budget responds comprehensively to the plight of the girl child in enhancing their dignity. In anticipation of the finalization of the Education Act, the budget is required to have a provision for the supply of sanitary wear for female learners. Based on equity consideration, the proposal is to begin rural primary and secondary learners from grade 4 to upper 6th form, and a provision of $200 million has been made available in this budget for sanitary wear. I now turn to broader social protection. The 2020 budget is being formulated at a time when government is seeking to respond positively to the increasing poverty and food insecurity situation across the country, and as government implements structural reforms under the TSP. Climate changes continue to impact negatively on food security. Government is cognizant of the need to scale up social protection interventions in the wake of increased vulnerabilities among citizens. It is encouraging that development partners remain committed to complement government efforts. To strengthen social protection programs, the 2020 budget will support the following: food for work and income generating projects, $50 million. Harmonized social cash transfer, $500 million. Basic education assistance model, BEAM, $450 million. Management information systems, $10 million. Decent work country program, $300 million. And the food deficit mitigation, $1 billion. Overall, the Ministry of Public Service, Labor and Social Welfare is allocated a budget of $2.4 billion. Let me turn to development partner support, Mr. Speaker, sir. Implementation of government development programs continues to benefit from support provided by development partners. This has gone a long way in improving livelihoods, as well as ensuring that no one is left behind, especially in the aftermath of the devastating effects of the Cyclone Idai and the drought experienced during the 2018-2019 cropping season. Cumulative disbursements by development partners to end September 2019 amounted to $331.2 million, of which $194.1 million was from bilateral partners and $137.1 million was from multilateral partners. Cumulative support from development partners to end December 2019 is projected at $610.4 million, with bilateral partners contributing $449.1 million and multilateral partners contributing $161.3 million. In 2020, development partners' support is projected at $677.6 million, with bilateral partners contributing $506.7 million and multilateral partners contributing $170.9 million. Given a government reiterates that free funds from international organizations, non-governmental organizations, missions and embassies may be used through Nostro FCA transfers for their operations, including settlement of local contracts. In the spirit of partnership, government is taking a proactive role to address concerns our partners and many other stakeholders continue to raise over cost of corruption, transparency, accountability, security of tenure, and so forth and so forth. We are alive to this. Let me turn to the other pillar of the budget, Mr. Speaker, which is competitiveness. The thrust of creating a conducive environment for attracting investment will be advanced in 2020, paying attention to the following key competitive element. One, the ease of doing business, which I've already alluded to. With the thrust of creating a rather conducive environment for attracting investment, government has embarked on the second round of ease of doing business reforms targeting 16 areas, including improvements in paying taxes, obtaining construction contracts, starting a business, ease of doing transport business, clearing of imports and export, among others. Let me turn to ZIDA, the Zimbabwe Investment and Development Agency. Government has been working to operationalize the one-stop shop investment center to reduce the bureaucratic process of registering, licensing, and facilitating investments and operations of companies. This is culminating in the establishment of a consolidated Zimbabwe Investment and Development Agency, ZIDA, and that bill is before Parliament. Let me turn to something new, Mr. Speaker said, a new proposal, which is an export revolving fund, and again, buttressing competitiveness. Government will support various exporters by setting up an export revolving fund with $20 million as seed capital for the development of the export sector with effect from 1 January 2020. This initially will target the horticulture sector and then will be spread to other sectors. On public enterprises, Mr. Speaker, the government is implementing a comprehensive program to reform state enterprises and parastatals to address weak governance and other operational and capitalization-related challenges. Therefore, the 2020 budget should fast-track the implementation of the public enterprise reforms whilst enforcing the provisions and regulations of the Public Entities Corporate Governance Act and making the necessary adjustment to all administered prices to ensure cost recovery. On research and development is critical for Zimbabwe's social, economic transformation and competitiveness of the economy. Research and development programs will be supported by both the government and the private sector as the country seeks to innovate in developing new products and services and also advance the value addition strategy. The budget has set aside resources for the research and development program, including the launch of a space satellite. I repeat, including the launch of a space satellite. On fighting corruption, corruption causes economic malaise, wastage of public resources, jeopardizes the environment for domestic and foreign investment, and general morale in the public service, reinforces political instability, and propagates social and economic disparities, even in the presence of economic and social policies. Based on the Auditor General's report, government is losing resources through corrupt activities. In addition, corruption in some parastatals and local authorities has compromised some desired development outcomes. This is a risk that some development partners may withhold. There's a risk that some development partners may withhold funding for critical programs and or projects. There's also a risk that government can also withhold funding likewise. Delays in taking remedial action against violations identified in audit reports has the unintended effects of propagating corrupt tendencies in the public service. To avert this risk, government from 2020 will focus on strengthening the internal control systems through, among others, finalization of the establishment of the centralized internal audit unit, developing and implementing a national anti-corruption strategy aligned with the good practice principles with periodic monitoring and evaluation of results. Number 3, enabling whistleblower legislation and protection in line with international best practices, and capacitating institutions established to combat corruption. And finally, addressing conflict of interest issues where government is both regulator and player. Furthermore, observations by the Auditor General will be pursued with a view to taking corrective measures. Let me turn to the financial sector. Mr. Speaker said, starting with the compensation of, for pension and insurance losses. The Justice Smith-led inquiry made recommendations in 2018 on compensation of pension members and insurance contracts prejudiced during the conversion of insurance and pension values will be implemented once government finalizes amendments to the pensions and insurance legislation, which will guide and enable enforcement of the compensation process. There's a review of the minimum capital requirements for insurance entities, Mr. Speaker said. The obtaining macroeconomic environment has necessitated upward review of minimum capital requirements for different players in the insurance industry to ensure that entities are well capitalized for the protection of value for policymakers and pension members. Consequently, minimum capital levels will, with immediate effect, be reviewed as shown on the table right there. For short-term insurers, capital will be up to 37.5 million. For life assurers, 75 million. Funeral, 37.5 million. Reinsurers, 75 million. Microinsurers, up to 4.5 million, in order to protect value for those that they insure. Meanwhile, IPEC is developing a risk-based capital framework, the Zimbabwe Integrated Capital and Risk Project, which will be launched in 2020. Let me turn to the review of preservation and minimum commutable pension, Mr. Speaker said. It is recommended that the pension preservation amount be reviewed from the current $600 to $6,000 in order to ensure that the amount preserved is decent enough to warrant payment of a deferred pension at retirement after meeting preservation expenses. It is further proposed that the minimum commutable pension be reviewed from $50 to $500 per month in line with inflation adjustments in the economy. Let me turn to other areas such as weather index-based insurance. Pursuant to the Transitional Stabilization Program objective of enhancing agriculture insurance and in line with the National Financial Inclusion Strategy, IPEC is developing a regulatory framework for weather index insurance products. It is envisaged that the framework will enhance regulation of weather index-based insurance products in order to build resilience and ensure policyholder protection in the agricultural sector. Let me turn to anti-money laundering. Significant progress has been recorded in terms of aligning our laws to address shortcomings identified through the Monitoring Evaluation Report, SAMLAG, with 33 out of 40 FATF recommendations having been rated compliant or largely compliant. However, there are some legislative deficiencies which require attention. Zimbabwe will address all its deficiencies by 2021 in order to fully comply with the FATF and avoid facing financial sanctions. Let me turn to other critical facilitative public services, Mr. Speaker said, starting with the security sector. Mr. Speaker said, our security services remain an integral part in ensuring a peaceful and stable socio-economic environment in our nation. Hence the need to ensure that our security services are fully funded to enable them to discharge their constitutional mandate. The 2020 budget will strive to ensure that we address issues that enable our security forces to undertake their mandate swiftly, such as aircraft maintenance, accommodation, equipment, mobility, electrification of prisons, and institutional provisions, medical supplies, as well as medical facilities. I propose allocations to the security cluster as follows. Defense and War Veterans, $3.11 billion. Home Affairs and Cultural Heritage, $2.8 billion. Zimbabwe Prisons and Correctional Services, $709 million. Improving the livelihood and welfare for war veterans through the provision of educational assistance, medical benefits, and funeral assistance will continue in 2020. Above all, support towards the self-help projects will be prioritized to ensure an improvement in the standard of living of war veterans. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to independent commissions. Government is supporting independent commissions, and the 2020 budget will therefore prioritize support towards their operations, infrastructure development, as well as equipping them with the requisite tools of trade. Treasury will also endeavor to make quarterly disbursements to the independence of the commissions. Let me start with the Public Service Commission. In order to enhance the critical work and operation of the Public Service Commission, the 2020 budget prioritizes funding operations in line with the Commission's strategic plan. In addition, the Public Service Commission will be supported in the realization of the service, among other mandates. Let me turn to the Judiciary and Correctional Services. The decentralization programs and projects will be supported, including the decentralization of justice delivery through construction of courts, provision of requisite equipment and furniture. Priorities also are being given to support towards expediting the work on alignment of the laws to the Constitution. Resources will be availed towards prisons and correctional services, farm production enhancement program, construction of institutional accommodation and institutional provision for prisoners and security vehicles. Let me turn to Parliament and the Audit Office. Within the limitations of the budget, Mr. Speaker, Treasury has allocated $1.87 billion to Parliament for its budget. The budget also addresses requirements of the Audit Office, covering personnel, condition of service, and tools of trade to enable Parliament to undertake value-for-money audits and audits, among other oversight functions. Let me turn to international relations, Mr. Speaker. Our embassies play a pivotal role in advancing our re-engagement and engagement process agenda under the TSP. In order to address the various challenges our missions are facing, in 2020, Treasury is providing $297.2 million towards rehabilitation and upgrading of infrastructure at foreign missions. In addition to phased procurement of properties and strategic missions, including pursuing public-private partnerships where possible. The budget will also capacitate various missions to enable them to execute their functions, particularly investment promotion, re-engagement, marketing of the country's image and potential, as well as consular services. Let me turn to the item of sport and recreation. Sports activities play an important role in communities, not just through improving the health and well-being of individuals, but also contributing to the empowerment of individuals and promoting the development of inclusive communities. The budget is therefore supporting recreation, leisure, and sports programs, including investment in recreation and sporting infrastructure, with primary focus on the youth, but not solely the youth. Let me turn to an important issue, Mr. Speaker, the issue of process regarding this 2020 budget. This is the issue of program-based budgeting and the integrated development planning process. Mr. Speaker, 2019 has been a watershed year in terms of implementation of program-based budgeting, PBP. Program-based budgeting is one of the core components of the results-based management system, which was adopted by government in 2005. The results-based management approach is a management approach which requires ministries, departments, and agencies, which I'll call MDAs, to focus on achieving specific objectives through strategic planning, systematic resource use, routine performance monitoring, and stringent reporting requirements. Mr. Speaker, sir, the results-based management system includes integrated development planning, IDP, results-based personnel performance, results-based monitoring and evaluation, and results-based budgeting, also referred to as program-based budgeting. Program-based budgeting directly links planned expenditures to clearly defined results and improved service delivery within the mandate of an organization. The approach shifts emphasis from inputs and activities to results and improves prioritization of expenditure by allocating limited government resources to programs with the highest impact. The approach encourages spending ministries to improve efficiency and effectiveness of service delivery. It is therefore imperative that ministries, departments, and agencies rigorously develop their performance information as they will be expected to account for performance of their programs in terms of planned outputs and outcomes. The Office of the President and Cabinet, the Public Service Commission, and the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development will put in place robust measures to foster a stronger performance culture in the public service and have undertaken to implement periodic joint reviews to assess progress. Mr. Speaker, sir, I now turn to revenue measures to support productivity, growth, and job creation. Mr. Speaker, sir, numerous incentives to support growth are already in place. These incentives cover productive sectors, which include agriculture, mining, manufacturing, tourism, among others. The incentives have contributed to the restoration of production capacity and enhanced competitiveness in some of the industries. During the period 2011 to about May 2019, the revenue that was foregone as a result of tax incentives amounts to $1.45 billion US. And the value that was transferred through this foregone revenue to the economy is about $9.3 billion US, covering mining, agriculture, manufacturing, tourism, transport, cross-cutting, and other concessions. So we are already giving quite a bit of incentives across the economy, but we've not been tracking and measuring the impact of these incentives. But we want to give more. I therefore propose to avail further incentives and also extend the tenure of existing incentives outlined in this abridged version of the 2020 budget statement that I'm obviously reading. One, let me turn to the support to industry. The suspension of duty on semi-knockdown kits used by the motor vehicle industry. I propose to remove SKD, which is semi-knockdown kits, from the specified list of goods liable for duty in foreign currency. I further propose to extend the facility for a further 3 years, beginning 1 December 2019. I now turn to paint manufacturing industry. In order to promote price competitiveness of paint manufacturers, I propose to ring-fence under suspension of excise duty 150,000 liters per month of illuminating power kerosene, which is a key ingredient in the manufacture of alkyd resins imported by improved paint manufacturers, and this is with effect from 1 January 2020. I now turn to furniture manufacturers. This is small-scale manufacturers. In order to promote growth and formalization of small-scale manufacturers, I propose a duty refund facility whereby small-scale furniture manufacturers pay duty on imported raw materials, which is claimable on a quarterly basis with effect from the 1st of January 2020. I turn to pharmaceutical manufacturers' rebate. The pharmaceutical industry has finalized plans to increase the product range of manufactured goods. Hence, I propose to provide for additional raw materials to be imported under a rebate of duty. Suspension of duty on milk powder. Local production of raw milk remains insufficient to meet the requirements of the dairy milk processors. Hence, I propose to extend the duty suspension of milk powder for the year 2020. Let me turn to suspension of duty on raw cheese. I propose to suspend duty on ring-fenced quantities of raw cheese amounting to 25,000 kilograms per month for a period of 12 months beginning 1 January 2020, for those who like cheese. The clothing manufacturers' rebate. The rebate facility for the clothing industry expires on 31 December 2019, Mr. Speaker said. Hence, I propose to extend the facility for a further 2 years, beginning 1 January 2020, in order to lower the cost of production. I now turn to the luggage wear manufacturers' rebate. In order to consolidate the gains realized by the luggage wear industry, which include increased output, employment, and exports, I propose to extend the rebate of duty facility for a period of 2 years, beginning 1 January 2020. Suspension of excise duty on raw wine. I propose to extend and increase the excise duty free ring-fence import quota from 175,000 liters to 200,000 liters per annum for a period of 2 years beginning 1 January 2020. Let me turn to the tourism industry, Mr. Speaker said. Notwithstanding the progress realized, there is a need to further support the industry to reach its full potential. I therefore propose the following incentives. 1, to extend rebate of duty on capital equipment imported by operators of hotels and lodges for a further 3 years beginning 1 January 2020. To extend suspension of duty of motor vehicles used by safari operators for game views and drives for 24 months beginning 1 January 2020. To introduce a suspension of duty facility to car hire companies for a period of 12 months beginning 1 January 2020, subject to the following conditions. And I want to extend the suspension of duty on the remaining vehicles used by tour operators for a further 1 year. I now turn to cross-border luxury coaches. I propose to extend the suspension of duty on the outstanding quota of luxury buses for a period of 12 months, taking into account developments in the motor industry. I've listened to that recommendation. Public services buses, I further propose to extend the suspension of duty facility for the importation of 100 buses for 12 months beginning 1 January 2019 in order to afford an opportunity for bus operators to replenish their fleet. Let me now turn to revenue-enhancing measures. The first one is deemed motoring benefits. I propose to review deemed motoring benefits as follows, in line with the current economic developments, with effect from 1 January 2020. So the proposed annual deemed motoring benefits are as follows: from 0 to 1,500 cc's, that will be increased to 54,000 Zimbabwe dollars. From 1,500 to 2,000 cc's, that will be increased to 72,000 Zimbabwe dollars. 2,000 to 3,000 cc, that will be increased to 108,000. And then above 3,000, that's up to 144,000. So an adjustment upwards in line with inflationary pressures. I now turn to excise duty on tobacco. I propose a review of specific rate from 50 to 100 per 1,000 cigarettes with effect from 1 December 2019 in line with global trends. Let me turn to some tax relief measures and now go back to the YETI program. This is the Youth Employment Tax Credit. Mr. Speaker, I've already alluded to the need for tax incentive to support job creation, which is key to sustainable economic development. I therefore propose to introduce a tax credit of $500 per month per employee for corporates that employ additional employees in a year of assessment. The credit will, however, be limited to a maximum of 60,000 Zimbabwe dollars per year of assessment. This is subject to review. The support framework will be published through regulations, will target employers who meet the following conditions, among others. 1, the company should be registered for personal income tax and be compliant for the preceding tax period. 2, the tax credit will only be claimed after the additional employee has served a period of 12 months consecutive, a period of 12 consecutive months. Employees should be aged 30 years and below at the time of employment. For the purposes of the incentives, employee excludes trainee, intern, and apprentice. The minimum wage payable to new employees should be at least $2,000 per annum. The tax credit will not apply to supervisory grades. The tax credit will not apply to corporates with a turnover exceeding an equivalent of $1 million because we recognize that the biggest employers tend to be the middle tier, which have a turnover below $1 million equivalent. This again is subject to adjustments, and it's the first time we are doing it, so we'll be ready to fine-tune it as we go along. This measure, which takes effect on 1 January 2020, will reduce employers' cost of hiring young people through a cost-sharing mechanism. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to personal income tax thresholds. I propose to review the tax-free threshold from $700 to $2,000 per annum and adjust the tax bands to begin at $2,001 and end at $50,000, above which the highest marginal tax rate is 40%, in line with economic developments, and this is with effect from 1 January 2020. So anyone earning below $2,000 per annum is tax-free in terms of income tax per month. To be clear, on the bonus tax-free threshold, I further propose to review the tax-free bonus from $1,000 to $5,000. This is with effect from 1 November 2019, in line with the bonus payments to civil servants this month. On the taxation of retrenchment packages, in order to safeguard the value of retrenchment packages, Mr. Speaker, I propose to review the non-taxable portion of the retrenchment package from $10,000 to $50,000, or 1/3 of the package, to a maximum of $80,000. Let me turn to the intermediated money transfer tax, IMTT. I propose to review the tax-free threshold from the current $20 up to $100, from $20 to $100, and the maximum tax payable per transaction by corporates from the current $15,000 to $25,000 for transactions with values exceeding $1.25 million. Let me turn to bulk payments through mobile banking platforms. For the avoidance of doubt, all bulk payments through mobile money banking platforms attract intermediated money transfer tax, except where such payments relate to remuneration. I therefore propose to exempt from IMTT social transfers by development partners accredited in terms of the Privileges and Immunities Act. I now turn to corporate income tax. The corporate income tax rate, Mr. Speaker, job creation and enhanced productivity and economic growth requires substantial investment in capital equipment, improved production techniques, and modern technology. Lowering the tax burden is also instrumental in increasing the return on equity. I therefore propose to review the corporate tax rate from the current 25% down to 24%, with effect from 1 January 2020. And that is a cut of 1%. Let me turn to value-added tax. Furthermore, I propose to reduce the VAT standard rate from the current 15% down to 14.5%, with effect from 1 January 2020 in order to stimulate aggregate demand. Let me turn to export tax on raw hides. In view of potential capacity to export raw hides without prejudicing the local industry, I propose to extend the export relief facility for 2 years, renewable on an annual basis. I now turn to capital gains tax, Mr. Speaker, sir. Where movable property is disposed in foreign currency, capital gains tax is also levied in the currency of trade. However, where the seller fails to provide documentary evidence on the flow of transactions, such transactions shall be deemed to have been conducted in foreign currency. Otherwise, they would provide the documentation. Let me turn to another development supportive of the mining sector, which is the royalty on diamonds. Mr. Speaker, diamond mines are exploiting conglomerate deposits. Hence, the cost of extraction has significantly increased. In order to promote investment in exploration and extraction, I propose to review the royalty on diamonds from 15% down to 10% of gross revenue, with effect from 1 January 2020. I now turn to excise duty, especially excise duty on fuel. Mr. Speaker, sir, notwithstanding that Treasury has channeled substantial resources collected from the IMTT, 2%, towards road rehabilitation, the Department of Roads remains incapacitated to undertake major road construction and rehabilitation projects. This has undermined rehabilitation and dualization of the Beitbridge Harare-Chirundu Highway, which government has undertaken to fund with internally generated resources. It is therefore critical to secure additional resources for the Beitbridge Harare-Chirundu Highway, which facilitates the movement of goods along the north-south corridor. I therefore propose to ring-fence 5% of excise duty revenue collected on fuel towards the construction and rehabilitation of the Beitbridge Harare-Chirundu Highway, with effect from 1 January 2020. Let me turn to customs duty on sanitary ware. A bit of a repetition here. Mr. Speaker, sanitary ware is a basic commodity for the hygiene of women and girls. However, its unaffordability is exposing the vulnerable to health-related problems. I therefore propose to extend duty exemption on sanitary ware for a further 12 months and also include sanitary cups and pants on the list of duty-free products. On tax administration, on VAT threshold, in order to ease tax administration, I propose to review the VAT registration threshold from the current 60,000 Zimbabwe dollars to 1 million Zimbabwe dollars, with effect from 1 January 2020. I now turn to legislative amendment pertaining to venture capital financing. Mr. Speaker, in order to incentivize venture capital funds to provide financing to startup companies, the government implemented a tax exemption on income on any company whose principal object is the provision of venture capital for development. However, legislation does not specify conditions for granting tax exemption. In order to minimize opportunities for abuse of the tax exemption, I propose to apply the following conditions on venture capital companies. One, the venture capital fund or company, as well as the recipient company, should be residents and also be tax compliant. The recipient company should not be listed on the stock exchange, hence the targeted beneficiaries are startup companies. 3, recipient companies should be in critical sectors of the economy, in particular agriculture, mining, manufacturing, and tourism. The venture capital fund or company should not control, directly or indirectly through related entity, a recipient company in which it holds shares. And finally, recipient companies should primarily be financed through equity as opposed to debt to the extent of the prescribed debt-to-equity ratio. I now turn to capital gains tax on donated houses. Mr. Speaker, donations of housing units to any local authority, employee share scheme, share ownership scheme, or community development trust. Mr. Speaker, donations of housing units to any local authority, employee share ownership trust, and community development trust are exempt from capital gains tax. I therefore propose to extend the exemption to houses donated to community development trusts. Efficiency of tax administration. Let me start with the designation of ports of entry and customs house. This pertains to Mlambapele port of entry. In recognition of increased flow of commercial goods imported through Botswana, I propose to designate Mlambapele as a port of entry with effect from 1 December 2020. In turn to the Gwanda Customs House, furthermore, I propose to appoint a customs house in Gwanda district in order to reduce the cost of doing business. Let me turn to customs dry ports. Mr. Speaker, congestion due to infrastructure bottlenecks, particularly at Beitbridge and Forbes border ports of entry, remains one of the major constraints in trade facilitation. In order to address this challenge, government has adopted the dry port concept, whereby commercial cargo is consigned for specific inland facilities pending final clearance. I therefore propose to designate customs dry ports in Mosingo, in Bulawayo, in Makuti, and Mutare in order to relieve pressure on ports of entry. Mr. Speaker, I'm now moving to the conclusion. Mr. Speaker, let me conclude by a quote from Arnold Schwarzenegger to spice things up.
I'll be back.
He says, what we face may look insurmountable, but I learned something from all those years of training and competing. I learned something from all those sets and reps when I didn't think I could lift another ounce of weight. What I learned is that we are always stronger than we know. I have no doubt that current economic challenges are surmountable, provided we put our efforts together as a nation and continue taking bold and decisive steps to open up and grow the economy. This includes seriously pursuing policies that enhance production, as I have alluded to. The monetary and fiscal reforms undertaken, if supported by increased domestic production, will clearly lay a firm foundation for sustainable and inclusive economic growth. In this regard, our thrust and priority for 2020 is centered on domestic production, productivity, job creation, all leading to growth. While we are focusing on productivity and growth, we are not lost to broader understanding of human and overall development, and for which I quote a famous economist, Indian economist, Nobel Prize winner in economics, Professor Amartya Sen. He argues that human development is about expansion of citizens' capabilities to fend for themselves. Let's always remember that, Mr. Speaker. I thank you. I now place the statement, the long version, and the bull book before Parliament, Mr. Speaker.
Question before the House is a motion by the Honourable Minister of Finance and Economic Planning Development that leave be granted to bring in a bill and make provisions for the revenues and public funds of Zimbabwe and to provide for the matters connected herewith or incidental thereto. Is there any debate? No debate. I say no debate.
Welcome back to the Mint and our continuing coverage of 2020 budget. Well, there you have it. The Minister of Finance standing in front of Parliament and giving us all his expectations for what's going to happen in the budget for 2020. Now, let's have a quick look at some key highlights of the budget presentation. And I'm telling you what, some of this is in your pocket as well. The Minister was quite clear. He looked at different programs, different social programs, also looked at what he could do for you and me. Let's look at some of these. Well, 2020 budget is focused on growth. He said the 2019 budget, of course, was austerity, and now, of course, the new budget, 2020 budget, would be more focused on growth. This is a good one for all of us out there. Tax-free threshold has been reviewed from $700 to $2,000 per month. That'll put more money in your pocket. And the tax-free bonus threshold as well. So those of you getting bonuses now in November, December, has been revised from $1,000 to $5,000. Bread, cooking oil and roller meal subsidies have been lined up. That's on the back of the GMB now being told or being allowed to sell wheat and maize at market-related prices. That's great for farmers who are out there obviously growing that sort of crop. 2% electronic tax. Remember, you are allowed to pay no tax from $20. That's been pushed up to $100 effective 1 November. Employees, now this is good. We talked about this in our budget build-up. Employers, if they hire youth will get $500 per month for that employment. This is in a bid to boost youth employment. As you know, almost 80% of our population is under the age of 35, so we need to generate youth employment. Look at the numbers that the minister came up with. Government revenue, he's anticipating 58.6 billion revenue for 2020 against expenditure of 63.6 billion. That's about 1.5% of GDP, which is not bad. I mean, in fact, he himself said in his presentation, it's almost balanced. Well, if you call 5 billion almost balanced, then yes. But I tell you what, though, he is definitely looking at trying to balance the books. Mining sector, of course, Zimbabwe is endowed with such incredible mineral resources that's set to rebound 4.7% in 2020. Of course, looking at the target of US dollars 12 billion by 2030. And of course, the mining sector is the one area of our economy that is set to boost our economic growth. Agriculture to grow over 5%. The minister said, of course, that the 2019 budget was affected by Cyclone Idai and more specifically the drought. 1 in 3 years were drought in Zimbabwe. So obviously agriculture to grow over 5% on the back of at least a decent rainy season. And of course, the minister in his budget also focused on how he's going to look at irrigation and put money towards irrigation, prioritize irrigation so that we have no climate shocks or drought shocks. And of course, the one issue that helped us re-engagement with the Western world, 380 million compensation for ex-commercial farmers. Already the minister, remember, had put some money away in the 2019 budget for commercial farmers, and he's increased to do that. Now, we're going to cross across shortly to Parliament, where the Mint reporter Ndaka Majaka is actually there to interview a few MPs on the ground to understand what they felt of the budget and their thoughts and views and some of them. Now, let's look at some of the other things that he did. Now, we're going to focus on just some the issues first that may affect us, if I can say us, because we're all Zimbabweans, and then move to some of the other issues the minister talked about. And I'm joined by Dr. Nyasha Kaseke from the University of Zimbabwe. Now, let's talk about VAT. This may help us at the till. VAT has been reduced slightly by 0.5% from 15 to 14.5%. But you know what? Everything helps, Nyasha.
Yeah, definitely everything helps, but it's an insignificant reduction. Reducing by half a percentage. I think it will not impact greatly in terms of our pockets.
All right. So now, another two issues I want to talk about in terms of taxes. Corporate taxes also being reduced from 24 from 25%. We spoke in the build-up earlier about that. Look, it's 1%, but you know what? Corporates that earn millions of dollars in revenue, 1% is 1%. That helps. That helps.
Yeah, that helps.
All right, and diamond royalty is also reduced to 10% from 15%. So those are some of the major highlights. But let's get into some of the other issues that the minister spoke about in his budget presentation. He's saying that inflation, we talked about this, inflation by 2020, end of 2020 will be down to 2%, and month-on-month inflation will start reducing in January. That's important because, of course, the month-on-month inflation is really the number that shows you how much prices of basic commodities are rising. We spoke about that, whether that's achievable. And let's talk about fuel. Fuel as well. The government said that they have put the price of fuel and electricity to economic levels, but they want the price of fuel to be the same as neighboring countries. For a very good reason, Nyasha.
Yes, it's for a reason. Mostly, I think the minister was trying to reduce arbitrage that was going on by other foreigners who were coming to Zimbabwe, buying fuel cheap in Zimbabwe, and then going back with the fuel in terms of their countries.
I know. I watched it happen. In fact, when I was down in Matabeleland recently, that's exactly what's happening right in front of me. So that's good, because if the fuel is the same price as most of the others in the region, well, that means no arbitrage, no leakages, and that's brilliant for us, the motoring public, which means that fuel hopefully may become more available, I think, because of that, as well as, of course, government moving to make the price more economical. Now, another one that affects us, or that's great for the traveling public, is targeted subsidies. The minister did say that they will subsidize, but it's got to be targeted, effective, and within budget. And the one area, of course, which I think has been quite successful is the subsidy for Zupco.
I think that was a good move because most of the workers were struggling to go to work.
Yeah. So at least now it's $1, $2, at least you can get to work.
Yeah, that may even sustain their transport cost.
Right, exactly. And of course, employers like that are still getting their workers in. Now, one thing that he said, and I mean, it may have slipped underneath this, but it's important. He said that government would now implement a single exchange rate regime. Now, the reason for that is quite simple. You were finding that there were players in the market that were accessing foreign currency at rates below the interbank market rate. And of course, that's a subsidy because if they sell, for example, a foreign currency at 8 or 9 to 1, and they're buying at the interbank rate of 15, 16, obviously that's a subsidy. That's good, particularly in the fuel sector, I think.
Yeah, I think that would also eliminate corruption and also some other forms of arbitrage that were there in terms of accessing the foreign currency. If everyone is now getting at the same rate across and all the banks are now collecting at the same rate, I think this would also reduce some forms of corruption and also some forms of arbitrage. Exactly. It will reduce distortion. It will reduce distortion. Okay, I think we're able to cross over to Parliament. The Mint reporter Ndaka Majaka is there. She may be able to give us some views and hopefully get a couple of MPs to get some feedback on what they thought of the budget. Ndaka. Okay, while we get her on the line. Okay, Ndaka, well, there you go. I mean, what do you think? What do you think of the budget? Do you think that there was anything specific that you looked at and said to yourself, this is great what the minister's done?
What I think is the most impressive thing that came out of today's budget is the fact that the tax-free threshold has been raised from $2,000 per month from $700 per month to $2,000 per month. I think this is going to bring a lot of relief to Zimbabweans. Not only this, the other impressive thing is that tax-free bonus has also been raised from $1,000 to $5,000 with effect from this month, November. So I think that was also impressive. Generally, the whole issue around tax-free thresholds really impressed me. Yeah.
Now, in the sense of a budget that's going to growth, do you think that in its generality, the minister, at least with the tools he had to operate with and the constraints he has in the economy, do you think that this at least is a semi-growth budget, at least is taking one of the few steps forward in terms of growth from austerity?
Yes, it is indeed a growth budget because if you look at it, he has tried to put in place measures to make sure that businesses can operate in a friendly environment. Although I'm not quite sure about the issue of the maximum tax payable by corporates in terms of the 2% tax, I felt that he could have raised that a bit higher. There's also the issue of corporate tax. He only cut that by 1 percentage point from 25% to 24%. So I feel that the 1 percentage point could have been higher, but generally I think it is a pro-growth budget.
Of course, the minister also focused on increasing capacity utilization in industry, looking at putting in lines of credit in Dhaka, and also trying to support the pharmaceutical sector so that Zimbabweans can get medicines, drugs at a cheaper price and affordable prices. I think that's a very big positive, is it not, in the budget?
That's a very big positive, and the other thing is, the other thing that I found impressive is that the minister is now a bit realistic with his GDP growth targets. Because if you look at it, he's revised next year's growth target from 4.6% to 3%. That's a 1.6 percentage point decrease. That shows that the minister is now in touch with reality and he's ready to give us realistic projections. So I also found that very impressive. Although it doesn't mean a lot for the country's economic growth, it means something in terms of the attitude from the minister and his general take on realistic expectations.
Okay, well, that's it from Ndaka. We'll go back to Ndaka when she's got a couple of MPs online, because we'd like to hear from the parliamentarians themselves what they thought of the Minister of Finance budget. Now, Nyasha, just there, let's going from what we were talking to about Ndaka. The government, as usual, has prioritized health. Health is one of the major issues in the outreach program that people spoke about. And one area, of course, is to reduce the cost of medicine and drugs. And he's trying to do that by stimulating support and investment in the pharmaceutical sector. At the same time, of course, let's couple it together with increasing capacity utilization. In other words, to create products, import substitution as well. I can throw it all together. But those are important for us, the Zimbabwean citizens, to have in place.
Yeah, the most important critical aspect of every person's life is health. Therefore, if the minister is prioritizing pharmaceutical in terms of supply of drugs, I think that's a very good idea. It's a noble idea in terms of that development, because we need to get some of these drugs at reasonable cost as compared to the cost that we are now getting some of the drugs at.
Exactly. And you look at companies like Caps Holdings, which closed down. I mean, we can revitalize that. We used to produce our own drugs, and in fact, we used to export drugs into the region. So that's a great thing for us in terms of health. So we need to move on that quickly, and the minister has prioritized that as one of his key result areas in this budget. Let's talk about agriculture. Now, agriculture, of course, is vital for not just food security, but also for employment, particularly all the value chains that it goes down and all the ripple effects. Command, he's saying that he wants to start shifting government away from command agriculture, direct financing to farmers, bringing in the private sector through a smart command structure, a guarantee structure, which will at least allow the 99-year leases to become bankable now.
I think that's a great move in terms of removing government from being this small funder in terms of most of this agriculture. And I think this would now encourage productivity in terms of these farms, because once you borrow from the banks, you have to return what you've borrowed. And this is now a smart way of now saying that let's honor whatever we have borrowed and pay up, because some other people are hiding behind that this money is coming from government.
So but we won't be paying.
Yes, if you are borrowing direct from the bank, you have to pay. And you have now to be productive for you to be able to pay back.
Exactly. And I think coupled with that as well, Minister talked about how they were going to focus on irrigation, because he talked about climatic shocks. In other words, 1 in every 3 years we have a drought in this country. We've just gone through a terrible drought in 2018-2019 season. So obviously putting together the right infrastructure, irrigation infrastructure, making sure that we can have continuous crops and food security is critical.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a very good development in terms of the agricultural sector, because we are capable of producing more given the number of dams that we have and also the holding capacity of these dams. If we are able to get the equipment, I think we are able to produce more. But the problem that might be there is that, for example, if we happen to have the drought this year, I think we are behind in terms of what recapitalizing.
Yes, I know, but unfortunately, if we have a drought this year, I think most of the numbers of the minister go down, because even if his inflation number is incorrect, 2%, he says by end of 2020, inflation going down, this can throw out the budget completely out of whack.
Yes.
Right, now then, unfortunately, I say unfortunately, but it's good from a health perspective, and I'm sure the Ministry of Health likes this. Cigarette prices are definitely going up, Nyasha. So those smokers out there, you can expect price increases in cigarettes, and probably spirits, if I'm not mistaken. It's the one thing the government can tax.
Yeah, because we know these are excise duties. Government is actually taxing to try to reduce smoking. But you know, it's an addictive product. It's very difficult for people to stop.
So I suppose it's good. It's good in terms of health for our nation and for us, but it's bad for those of us who smoke and want to see the prices go up. I don't say me, of course. But anyway, now another thing, there was always this aspect that Zimbabwe imports too many cars. We import cars. Of course, the duties were great, going to government and foreign currency, but by removal of duty on car kits, that hopefully doesn't just reduce the cost of importing cars, but it also stimulates employment, because now they have to be assembled at local car manufacturers.
I think that's a very good development. I was also commenting on the issue to do with some of the buses that we're importing. Why also not import the kits and assemble some of these buses local? This would also create employment. It would also even create improve production in certain industry, metal, all those related to industry.
Okay, well, great. Now, let's cross back to Ndaka Majaka, the Mint reporter. She's actually got Honourable Dexter Nduna there with her to get a couple of comments from Honourable Nduna to see what he thought of the budget. Ndaka, over to you.
Thank you so much, Andy. We're joined by Honorable Dexter Nduna, the Chegutu West MP. Here he's just going to give us his few takeaways from the budget today, and the things that he found impressive and the things that he didn't find impressive. Honorable Nduna, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you so very much. The Minister of Finance really touched to the core, the pith, the heart of annihilating the issue of cholera and typhoid in local authorities. He has given close to $500 million for that cause, and it is really applaudable over and above the 5% that he has apportioned for devolution and to the local authorities. This is quite applaudable. And he has also touched on capacitating the $12 billion economy come 2023 of the mining industry. So he is really given his all. And I want to applaud him for the passenger buses or for the public transport operators. He has given the bus operators 100 buses that they can import duty-free in 2020, and he has given a 12-month lifeline. So it is applaudable. Previously, there was just a luxury coaches importation, and they had imported up to 25 buses where they had a cap of 100 buses, and now what was left was 75 buses for the luxury coaches. But now he has come all guns blazing, and he has said duty-free for the buses, for the public transporters.
Well, that's very exciting, but seeing that your constituency has got a lot of artisanal miners, what do you take away from the budget that is going to help your constituency?
Certainly, there are a lot of ventures in terms of mining ventures that are coming into the fore in terms of capacitation of the platinum industry, the gold industry, which certainly is skewed towards the gold mobilization strategy, a way that we are losing a lot through illicit outflows and revenue leakages in the gold sector. So he certainly has capacitated the small-scale miners to the effect that they can now optimally and effectively bring their gold to fidelity. How so? Because what has actually happened is he has pronounced the issue of capacitating the Minister of Mines on a use it or lose it policy. So that gives title to the small-scale miners, and as long as they have no title, they are getting what they can and canning what they get and selling off for illicit outflows. However, currently, with that in mind, I think we're going to see a lot coming in from the small-scale miners and the artisanal miners. So we are quite elated. We are currently grappled with a lot of gold rushes in Chegutu West constituency in particular on EPO 18, and we are embedded with the owners of EPO 18 in order that we can extract the resources in their EPO and direct those resources to fidelity, because these are the claims that are being held for speculative purposes.
But then a major part of your constituency had expected the minister to look at the issue of decriminalizing gold possession, which he did not touch on in this particular budget. Do you find that disappointing in any way?
He actually asks that the issue of the Mines and Minerals Act comes expeditiously to Parliament so that it can be repealed. The Gold Act needs to be repealed, in particular Section 3 of the Gold Act, which speaks to and about criminalization of gold possession without a license. And it also gives a sanction, or it also gives a sentence of more than 5 years without an option of a fine. So he actually asked that the Minister of Mines brings expeditiously for repeal the Gold Act in particular, so that we can decriminalize gold possession, decriminalize possession of gold without a license, and also the extraction of that resource. That is going to go a long way in terms of capacitating the people of Chegutu West in particular and Zimbabwe in general. By the way, I'm known as Mkorokoza Mkuru, but I'm I'm also elated that the small-scale miners have the largest amount of deliveries to Fidelity. The issue, certainly, of infrastructure development cannot be overemphasized. He spoke of the issue of RGM International Airport, and he has also talked about the arrivals in 2019, 2.5 million arrivals, which compare to 1.5 million arrivals in 2013. So there is quite a big upsurge, but there should be optimum utilization of the available infrastructure. The airport in Victoria Falls is now capacitated to receive about 1.5 million arrivals, but it is still grappling between 500,000 to 1 million. So we need to do more. He has really capacitated the tourism industry by removing the rebates.
Honorable Nduna, thank you so much for giving us your time today.
You are most welcome. Thank you so very much.
So we come back to you in the studio, Andy. That was Honorable Nduna, who just gave us his perspective on the 2019 budget. As you may know, the Ministry of Mines has said that it's targeting $12 billion in mining receipts by 2030. So that is what he was just expanding on. We now come back to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Ndaka. That was Honourable Dexter Nduna Chagutu, West Member of Parliament. He seemed very happy because, of course, his constituency is a lot of miners, a lot of artisanal miners, and, of course, some of the things that he raised there in terms of leakages. However, there is one thing the Minister didn't put, and hopefully we may get it in the next monetary policy, and that's looking at the retentions. Currently the gold miners were bleating about the retentions. They didn't like the 45-55% retention in Forex and local, and they were hoping that hopefully those retention levels will either disappear or go up even more. But maybe that will be for the monetary policy rather than the budget. Yeah,
I think it's more of a monetary policy issue, but he talked about how to deal with what leakages, of which I doubt very much how he is going to deal with what leakages, because some of these are small-scale or artisanal miners, and it might be very difficult to control them, because remember, they are actually getting pure gold. It's not gold that can be further processed. So if they are getting pure gold, the leakages, I think it's very difficult to control. I think the leakages as well are about people coming and offering them 100% in foreign currency, and it's more attractive for them, but even though the price is not so good. Look, one thing as well, which Honourable Nduna mentioned there, tourism. And funnily enough, on this one, I may actually be out of sync with the Minister of Finance, because he reckoned about 1.8 million in 2013. ZTA estimate it could be 2.3 million visitors to Zimbabwe in 2020. That is one area of our economy which there's no doubt about is booming. Yeah, definitely it's booming, but what has happened is that the number of days that people are staying has gone down. The number is increasing because of the direct flights that we now have from, I think we have got several direct flights, Cape Town,
straight to Victoria Falls.
Straight to Victoria Falls. So this is actually a good development that we have done in the country. One
area, of course, of the more disadvantaged population in Zimbabwe, orphans, citizens at risk. The minister was extensive there about social programs. He bolstered them in terms of issues such as food assistance, looking at citizens at risk, and so forth. You know, it's critical that we look after the more disadvantaged our community, and the minister did that. And as we said, you know, the minister was aware that you needed targeted social programs that really were effectively getting to the right people in the community that were at risk. And I think we kudos to him that he made sure that he did not forget that in his budget. Now, infrastructure. He did mention issues such as Robert Mugabe Airport, Victoria Falls Airport has been built, the dualization of some of the highways have been done. But he also did say that, you know what, we haven't been spending a lot on infrastructure over the years, and there's a deficit. It's catching up with us. There's no doubt about it. I mean, this is not the minister's fault. This is many, many years, decades, in fact.
Yes. For example, the dualization of Bedbridge Road, I think it is now overdue, and we are supposed to be realizing a lot of income from that road. But now maybe, since we are now allocating more significant budget amounts in terms of that, I think it's a good development in terms of infrastructure as well.
Just three issues I'd just like to touch on now. Government said they'll continue to support women, particularly in the SME and informal sector, which is very vital. If you watched the chase last night, you heard from some of the women representatives that talked about how they wanted the budget at least to look at how the minister could put in place programs or initiatives to support women who seem to be at the moment carrying the family. I'm not saying that men don't, but the women definitely are taking a larger burden under the economic duress that we are in the moment. So that was good. He was committed to that. But also, you know, this is important because it's always said that Zimbabwe has become a nation of importers. We seem to like imports more than our own. And the Minister definitely touched on import substitution and export stimulation.
I think that's a great development in terms of the economy, because we are externalizing our foreign currency by importing some of the things that we can produce locally. For the past 10 years, for your own information, we've lost close to $32.8 billion US by importing things that we used to produce locally.
And that's just too much money. And in fact, we're buying products that we produce locally. We want to buy the imported one, which is just wrong. So if you couple that with increased production, import substitution, also export stimulation, coupled with an industrial policy that is integrated into the national budget, as well as a health policy that looks after our basic human rights of health for all, you start seeing how the minister is trying to integrate the entire budget to make one whole. Now, fast track. Now, public enterprises, of course. There's been a huge drain on the fiscus for public enterprises. He talked about resuscitating the steel industry, looking at Cisco Steel in particular. But one area there was to fast-track public entities reform, and that could be different things. It could be either privatization, it could be finding strategic partners, it could be revamping them. But definitely, 2020 is going to see a lot of these public entities that haven't performed, either restructured, strategic partners found, and getting them out of government books, out of government fiscus.
Yeah, definitely, because we expect this institution to be self-sustainable in terms of their own operations, and also maybe to give to government dividends or even bonuses to the government. But if they are continuously draining from the fiscus of the government, I think this is not good, unless if they are really strategic, say that we know that we need this service. Yes.
Right, definitely. And of course, finally, our last point, of course, look, there's so much to talk about, and I'm sure tomorrow we're going to continue our discussion on the budget, looking at various aspects of it. He talked about duty-free for powdered milk. He talked about paraffin he talked about solar, trying to do more in renewable energy. There's so much more to talk about. But really, I want to just focus lastly on human capital development. The minister acknowledged education, of course, is always vital in any economy, and human capital development is important. He looked at how we could develop human capital, but not just traditionally, looking to see how we can develop our youth and our you work at UZ for the new 21st, 24th century now, isn't it? New skills are required. Yeah.
Definitely. We need to be empowered ourselves with the new skills. And what we should also know is that the youth are there for the future. And if these are also the people who mastermind the change that we want in the country.
All right, that's brilliant. So that's excellent. That's good on that. So, but a word of caution. The minister did say that any success of this budget, or in fact any budget, is all about managing expenditure within budget. It's a tight monetary policy. It's making sure that there's no spending outside budget. These are things that have happened in the past in terms of government expenditure. That's why we hear supplementary budgets all the time. He was also aware that he knows wage pressures are coming through in the civil servants, and government is committed to a fair wage, a living, decent wage for government civil servants, and they're going to be constantly reviewing and looking at that. And of course, he announced for you civil servants all your bonuses in November. You know what we like to do on the Mint? We like to leave you with a smile on your face. So that's great. So there we go. What's the major takeaway? I take it. And Ndaka and Majaka there, the Mint reporter at Parliament, she said it. Tax-free threshold up from $700 up to $2,000. And of course, your bonus for coming up to December. Bonus, tax-free bonus, $1,000 to $5,000. And the tax bans start at 2001, putting more money in your pocket. Our continuing coverage will continue. Please look at our website, ztn.co.zw, and our Facebook page, Zim Papers TV Network, for news stories and opinions on the budget. We'll be continuing doing that for the next couple of days. And of course, the Mint. The Mint, as you know, ZTN's top business show and Zimbabwe's top business show. We will be back with shows for you on a weekly basis, daily basis, in fact. So look out for that. And I'm sure all of you out there in the world who looks at the Mint and wants to know about the economy will be there. All I can do, Nyasika Seke, UZ, thank you so much for coming and being my analyst today. Great job, sir.
You're welcome.
Well, that's it for us. This is a Mint special. We looked at the budget. We've been with you for about 4 or 5 hours looking at the budget. We hope you've enjoyed this broadcast live from ZTN studios here in Harare, Zimbabwe. All I can say is take care. I hope you enjoyed the budget and you all be safe. Goodbye.